My name is James Harris, and I'm a senior lecturer in modern European history at the University of Leeds. And it is my great privilege and honour to have the opportunity to talk today to Professor Sheila Fitzpatrick, who is a Bernadotte E. Schmidt Distinguished Service Professor at the University of Chicago, who is the author of, among other books, A Commissary of Enlightenment, 1970, the editor of Cultural Revolution in Russia, 1978, author of Education and Social Mobility, 1979. Perhaps many of you will know her best for the textbook on early 20th century Russian history, The Russian Revolution, first published in 1982, and since entering its third revision in 2007. The author of Stalin's Peasants in 1994, Everyday Stalinism in 1999, Tear Off the Masks, Identity and Imposture in 20th Century Russia, 2005, and innumerable other books and articles. Professor Fitzpatrick has perhaps done more than any other historian to shape the field of modern Russian history. And perhaps most famously, she is associated with revisionism, with leading the challenge to what was then the dominant totalitarian model in the 1970s. And I'd kind of like to focus our conversation on that transition in the field and the rise of revisionism. Could you, for us, characterize the state of the field as you entered it, having completed your PhD?
Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't come directly to America. I suppose I did after a few years, but what I can characterize will be American focused, and it will be what I saw when I arrived, which I think was 72 or 73. And I think now, looking back, that my perceptions of what was going on were not completely accurate. But the way I understood it, there was tremendous interest in studying the Soviet Union, and that was within a Cold War context. There was the enemy, and so therefore one wanted to know the enemy. The people studying it were mainly political scientists at that point, and the model, as you said, that they were working with, as I perceived it, the dominant model was a totalitarian model, which was based on a sense of similarity of Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Now, when I arrived in America in the early 70s, I came, having been trained as a historian, and with the historian sort of concern about sources and archives, and none of that seemed quite foreign to the field as it was in America then, partly because it was hard to get there. To get to the Soviet Union, to do research, you had to be one of the relatively few people who went on a government exchange, and then they didn't want to let you into the archives and so on. Anyway, nevertheless, I wanted to do that kind of, I wanted to be a historian, which involved fairly extensive work with primary sources. And I also, I think, already wanted to do social history, although I was not doing social history. I was more on the sort of political cultural at the time I arrived. So I perceive it, in short, as a field dominated by political scientists, dominated by Cold War, and as I saw it, Cold War prejudices, which prevented a sort of objective approach, and also by political scientists.
Can you characterize in a few sentences, what is the totalitarian model in its essentials?
Well, the notion of the totalitarian model is that you have a system where you have a regime that aspires to total control over its citizens and has set up mechanisms which more or less make that achievable. And of course, there's also a value judgment put in there. This is by definition usually thought of as a bad regime. It's the opposite of democracy. And there are other characteristics given in definitions of totalitarianism, but those would be the ones that I in particular reacted to. And my doubt always was about the presumption that every initiative, every change comes from the top and it's the result of a decision to produce that effect. I just was very doubtful that that can be so anywhere, that you can have a society that is only the object of manipulation, that the leaders move it around the way they want, and it works. I didn't believe that in principle, and so I wanted to investigate what is it that's happening. As we put it, the term then was from below. In other words, we try and look at things from below instead of simply from above.
So is there an extent to which self-consciously that was the project of the first book of Commissary of Enlightenment?
I don't think that was the project of the first book, really. It was after the first book. What I was really interested in was the relationship between Bolsheviks and intellectuals, and particularly the sort of mediating people, like my man Lunacharsky, that I focused on. And I think I was also interested in what one was to make of the Bolshevik claims to be concerned about popular enlightenment. That the Bolshevik claims that one of their aims was to enlighten the people. I thought, well, that's very different from what mainly people connect with the Bolshevik Party, and how does it indeed fit in? And so I was exploring that, and I think there what I found, I mean, if one, the sort of short version of what I thought I found, was that indeed there was a concern. Enlightenment of the people was a real concern, that is spreading literacy and so on. But it wasn't a top priority concern. And that I interpreted mainly, I thought of priorities in terms of funding then. But I think one could take it further. So they had that commitment, but it was not at the top of the list of their commitments.
And the book itself was not particularly controversial when it emerged. Is it not the later work? It's social mobility, education and social mobility.
Yeah, no, Cultural Revolution and education and social mobility were really where I got into trouble. The Commissariat of Enlightenment, I think it was quite, it did well. People liked it. People were interested to hear that there was all this stuff going on with the arts. But where I in my research, when I got to the Soviet Union, I did research, even some archival research, and that Commissariat of Enlightenment, which is really a Ministry of Education and Culture, I found myself working not only on its cultural side, but its educational side. And that led to the book Education and Social Mobility, and some of the ideas that got me into trouble. And those ideas really had to do with the fact that there were affirmative action programs. The revolution is made on behalf of the working class. That's the claim. So what's that going to mean? And one of the practical ways that they gave it meaning was that the revolution has allowed, or is going to allow, people from the working class to move upwards. And this was facilitated both by affirmative action programs on behalf of workers. They were also on behalf of small nationalities, but that's another question. These were introduced mainly at the end of the 1920s, but at the same time was the period of the great industrialization push, which of course created many more a greater need for managerial and professional. Those strata of society expanded, so naturally that produced upward mobility in and of itself, so that the effect was multiplied. So I was talking about upward mobility, and I said, well, usually when people are upwardly mobile, or often, they think that whatever regime or system they live under facilitated that, as Americans obviously have always done. And that was a very unpopular line in an American context to make about the Soviet Union, because I think there really is some feeling in America that, upward mobility is the thing that that's our democratic thing.
Were you saying in that book that the regime, for that reason, was popular? Or was that something that...
I was saying it would, no, I didn't. I think I may have been understood as making a bigger claim, but I was saying it was popular with the beneficiaries. I was saying that those people who came from the lower classes and after the revolution rose into the elites felt that the revolution had made that possible and had a kind of loyalty. In other words, I was making an argument that this looks as if this is a regime surviving not only on fear, but that there's some base of support, but it was support from the new elite that I was emphasizing. I was not sure at that point whether there was any other support. But that comes in my later books. So.
To what extent did you anticipate the negative reaction? Did it take you by surprise?
I was very surprised, yeah, because I thought social mobility, that is a universal social science concept that you can, you apply it to America, you apply it some other place, but I had no sense, I didn't understand America well at all, and I had no sense it was so charged for them. I was extremely surprised.